How was working in London and working in New York versus Australia in terms of culture, the leadership sort of ethos?
The US is just such a large place, and the business landscape is just so much bigger than it is in Australia. The leadership team there had just unbelievable depth of experience, international experience.
And I do also think there's a lot of value in the people around you.
I'm a big believer of you win as a team, you fail as a team, and you get back on the horse together as a team.
What advice would you give to someone who was just starting out?
Make sure it's what you want to do. Like, what are your motivations for doing it? Why do you want to be a leader? Is it something you have a passion for? Is it something you even think you might have a passion for, that you want to kind of test and figure that out? I would always say never do it for the money, because there are other ways to earn money without necessarily going into being a manager or a leader.
Welcome to the Leadership Roadmap podcast, where we uncover authentic journeys behind tech leaders. Today in the studio, we've got Matt. Welcome, Matt.
Good morning, mate. How are you?
Very good, thanks. So Matt is the GM of Technology and Strategy at Architecture.
Yep.
Data,
Tabcorp,
pretty much everything.
Pretty much everything except security and digital. Yep.
Yeah. So welcome on, and if you want to just give a brief intro of yourself and what you're currently doing at Tabcorp in your role.
Yeah, for sure. I've been at Tab now for about 2.5 years. I joined a really interesting time in the business. It was just a few months after it demerged from the lotteries organisation and was trying to find its feet as a standalone company, which is pretty exciting actually. And I originally came in with a remit around data. Thankfully, we made some pretty good progress on that quickly, and sort of got on our journey to deliver our new kind of data architecture and all the goodness that comes with that. And since then, I suppose my role has expanded quite a bit, and now covers data, strategy, architecture, engineering, cloud, and operations. So yeah, pretty broad remit. It's a lot of fun. It's a fast-paced business in a fast-paced industry. 24 hours a day, never sleeps. So yeah, it's exciting and fun place to work.
Yeah. So you cover the whole shebang.
Yeah, like I said, it's pretty much everything except like digital and cyber. Probably the two sort of core bits that aren't in my portfolio. We've got other lines of business like broadcast and gaming as well, which have their own kind of GM of technology across those. But within, mine is kind of the horizontal piece across most of the technology landscape.
Yeah, nice. And with since you split with a lotto, you've got the second most amount of retail sites, is it?
I believe so. Yeah, I think lotteries is the biggest. I think they're over 5,000. We're about 4,500. So when you look at pretty much every pub, club, our retail stores, and what have you, it's a huge footprint, which thankfully is pretty stable. And we work closely with our partners at Telstra and things like that on it. But it's a huge footprint.
What got you into leadership in the first place, Matt?
You know what? I've been thinking about that, leading up to coming on here, and I think originally it was kind of organic. I found that in the earlier part of my career, peers and kind of colleagues would sort of seek my advice and what have you, and sort of a bit of gravitation, I guess, towards me and what I was thinking, and how I would offer an opinion on how they might want to do things. I think that kind of then rolled into, I suppose, more formal kind of manager roles and things like that. But then I guess when it really kind of clicked for me that my leadership style was working well was when people would seek me out to say, hey, I want to work with you, or I want to work for you. And then I suppose more and more, like if I was leaving an organization to go somewhere else, the people in my team would be asking, hey, can I come with you? Is there a role for me? And it kind of makes you think, wow, I guess I'm having a positive impact on these people if that's if they want to keep working with me, and which I think is pretty cool. And there's some people in my network who I've literally worked with for 16, 17 years on and off. So a lot of my leadership team now at Tab I've worked with in the past and what have you. And you build these, I suppose, networks of like-minded people. And it lasts the test of time. So yeah, I think that's I don't think I initially set out to be in leadership, but it just more kind of came to me.
Yeah, and tech leadership in particular, because you came from more of a non-technical background originally, didn't you?
Pretty much only very early in my career. So I've been in tech now for over 20 years. Yeah. It was something that even at school, it was something that I was interested in. It was something that I had a bit of a knack for. It just kind of made sense to me. There's been sort of certain aspects of technology that over the years, you kind of go, I enjoy that, and I'm good at that, so I'm going to spend more time on that than other things. So for me, it's been things like data, strategy, architecture, things like that. They've been the areas that I suppose I enjoy the most, and therefore I put more time and more effort into and had more roles sort of around that. But technology as a whole is something that I just find interesting, and the reality is now with data, AI, generative AI, which you can't have a podcast and not say generative AI. When was there a more exciting time to be in technology and indeed to be a technology leader? But I think it's going to be interesting how the technology leadership is going to change, I think, a lot over the next few years because of things like Gen AI.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. You cannot have a conversation without mentioning AI now. What are you doing inside Tabcorp or personally to stay up to date with that stuff?
So personally, it's, again, if something interests you, I think that you kind of have, you go out of your way to seek more information about it, to, kind of keep yourself abreast of, the most current trends and what have you, which is not easy because it's moving sort of so fast. Like me personally, I suppose I take my insights and my learnings from, a bunch of different places, people, areas, whether it's, reading, what have you during my daily commute in the mornings and the afternoon, whether it's, having conversations with, vendors, peers and colleagues in the industry and things like that. That's how I try to stay across things. I think at Tab, we're doing some really cool stuff. Like I said, my original remit at Tab was very much, data-centric. Let's get a data strategy in place. Let's figure out the right technology for it. Let's figure out the right use cases to get a lot of value from it. We're kind of coming towards the end of that initial journey now. And, we've built, a fantastic data capability. We've got, we've built a generative AI foundational architecture on top of that. We've piloted a few internal use cases. We've got ideas about how we can, kind of take it further in FY26 in the coming months. So, yeah, exciting times.
Yeah, I feel like every time I meet someone, they're telling me about a new AI app that's come out.
Sure.
You got ChatGPT, Claude, Perplexity, DeepSeek. What was the other one? Manus AI.
AI.
Every single week.
It is, and it's kind of interesting because you kind of got to wonder, like, how do you hedge your bets there? How do you make sure that you're investing in the right things, not over-investing in something that, may run out of puff, right? Like you look at, years ago, like with cloud and things like that, there was a lot of new capability coming out from the hyperscalers, whether it be Google, Amazon, what have you. And some of that for them, even though they productized it and sold some, products on it, they eventually kind of petered away as well, right? There were, so you got to, I think it's really tricky to figure out, how am I going to double down on this technology or on this capability on a platform? So I think we're at that point now where, again, I mentioned we've built like a foundational architecture, which is kind of largely agnostic of, different LLMs, of different, kind of capabilities in market, so as that we can kind of see what's going to have the legs and what's going to stand the test of time.
Yeah, there's a lot of trial and error.
There is, yeah. And I think the key for my sort of philosophy on that is, try what you think is going to work. I'm not necessarily the guy who says let's try everything, but try what you think is going to work. Do enough to, kind of due diligence, do enough, kind of research to figure out how closely it might or might not work for you. But then start small. Do a proof of concept. If the proof of concept turns up something that looks interesting, do a pilot. If the pilot looks like it's going to turn up something interesting, there's probably a couple of good indicators that, this might be for you, and then, you can invest more deeply and put more effort and energy into it. But I think start small, validate your hypotheses, validate, your beliefs. And then once you've got some of those validations, then you can have a run.
I saw recently that you'd put up a post about the huge AWS migration that you went through at Tabcorp. What didn't you put on that post? What happened behind the scenes that we need to know about?
Oh man, it was hard. Like, it was really hard. So we were modernizing a kind of 20-year-old application, which, I've always been a big believer that old doesn't mean bad. You need to assess each system, each platform for, its strengths, its weaknesses, the value that you get from it, how it fits in the broader ecosystem. But, we made the decision that this platform, did what we needed it to do. There wasn't things in market that directly did comparable things, and we'd have to, maybe buy a product and then spend a lot of money in, enhancing it, customizing it, and that's just, didn't feel like the right move. So we made the decision to modernize what we had. So we sort of took it, re-architected it, and then migrated it to AWS. But it was hard. It was really hard. You're working with, again, 20-year-old platform that, wasn't cloud native, wasn't architected for the cloud, so we had to re-architect a bunch of it. And I guess that hard translated into time and work and effort and energy. There was weekends, late nights, which, is not what we ever set out to do, right? Like in anything, not just this, instance, but it takes people away from their friends, their families, the things they enjoy doing outside of work. Yeah. So I guess my role during, that period was, I guess, to keep the team, just to, I suppose, be there, keep the team, engaged, offer a perspective. There was lots of challenges, as you can imagine, right, with what we were doing, and not tell them what to do. Rather, as we identify a challenge or identify a, possible opportunity on how to modernize it and how to get it cloud ready, offer a perspective on, have we thought about this? Have you looked at that? Could this be an option? And then try and keep them motivated, which is easier said than done when it's, kind of, again, like the 5th weekend in a row or, the 3rd late night this week. And I think, leading the team through that really is about reminding them what we're doing and why. Yeah. But also, it's really easy for all of us and, teams to not realize that along the way they're making really, really good progress. They overcome a challenge that, maybe a day or an hour beforehand felt insurmountable, but they get over it. Or, we were going to implement something a certain way, but, hey, we found a better way to do it. So kind of, I guess my role was just to keep reminding them of that along the way, going, hey, all of these small wins and all of these, kind of good decisions and all of this curiosity is being brought to bear. And, the win is not just at the end. There's lots of wins along the way.
Yeah, I think that's important to celebrate those small wins along the way. And,
absolutely.
Keep the team focused on that end vision, that end goal as well. So
definitely.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. And then you recently went back to school, did you, to Deakin University?
I did, yeah. Last year I enrolled in a Masters of Leadership. Awesome. Which was, I think it's relatively new as a master's to, normally it's a Master of Business, Master of this, what have you, but this is, a dedicated Masters of Leadership. And like, if I'm honest, it was a little daunting because, I haven't done, a lot of formal education in, years, maybe decades. Other than I started an MBA twice in the last 12, 15 years. Twice I've started, a few years apart. And I kind of get a little bit into it, and then it just hasn't stuck. I get caught up on both times. I kind of got caught up on the fact that what was being taught didn't match up to my lived experience. Whether it be working with boards, working with executive teams, working, with financials and what have you. It felt too academic, and I was struggling to pull things out of the MBA that I could actually put in practice. And maybe that's a me thing and not an MBA thing, but it just didn't work out for me. And I can't actually even remember how I found out about the Deakin Masters of Leadership, but it came to my attention somehow, and I kind of did a bit of reading online. Just went, hey, this sounds pretty cool. And then I went to one of the information sort of seminars where the course director kind of was on there himself. It was like a Zoom call, and he kind of talked about what the course looked like, the outline of the course, what ideally the participants would get out of it. And it just kind of been, that sounds really cool. I'm into that. And I guess the reason for doing it was I kind of think to myself, is my leadership as good as it can be? And I think the answer to that, hopefully, is going to be for all of us is always no.
Always, yeah.
And if this is another way, because I've learned a lot of different ways to, build out my leadership capability and learn more over time, but this felt like another avenue that I hadn't explored. So, I'm part way through. I'm absolutely loving it. I think the biggest challenge I find is trying to fit in work, family, learning, health, enjoyment, or kind of all of it at the same time. So I've probably deferred a couple too many times on a couple of subjects just because, busy periods of work and things. But I am resolved to get this done over the next year or so.
Yeah. No, that's awesome. And like you say, we're always learning. So it's a good message to put out there. We'll go back to that. So how do you balance all of those things? Because I think everybody has their own way of doing it. I know for me personally, I can't have a balanced day or a balanced week. I'm sort of all in on something for a few days or a week, but then I'm, all in on something else. So whether that's working really hard for a week, but then, the family sees me for a week or whatever that might be.
It's not easy. And there's people who do it way better than I do. But I have, I suppose, a few, kind of, I don't know what you call them, traditions or habits that I try to use to, keep as much balance as possible, right? So, this year I've am I putting enough effort and energy into health and, what well-being and what have you? And I was just like, I haven't been. It's just not been there. So this year I've been getting up at 4:30 every morning, hopping on the spin bike, punching out, initially I was punching out about 10 miles. This morning I got up 4:30, punched out 20 miles on the spin bike.
Solid.
It's fun. Like, it wasn't fun for the first couple of weeks, but been sticking with it for a few months now. So that's kind of a morning ritual that I kind of do every day and or most days, and I enjoy it. I feel better all day long because of it. My mind is sharper. My body feels better. Even though I'm getting up at 4:30 instead of 5:30, I feel less tired throughout the day. So I think that's something new that I've introduced. But the family, like, I've got 4 kids. 2 of them aren't kids. So I've got a 25-year-old, a 24-year-old, an 11-year-old, and a 7-year-old. And they all live at home except for my eldest. She's out living with friends and what have you at 25, as you'd expect. We have Sunday lunch. So Sunday lunch we have probably at least 2, more often than not 3 or 4 times a month, where we'll all kind of come together. I get up, that's why I do Sunday mornings. I get up, normally take the younger kids down to the park and we'll kick the ball around, shoot the netball and things like that. Come back, cook a roast, cook a this, cook a that. And then we all kind of come together. My mum comes over, sometimes my sisters and their families come over. But I think that's kind of our anchor as a family, and that I find that really important for me. It's it's just a routine that kind of keeps, especially as their older kids are older and they've got friends and boyfriends and girlfriends and things like that. It's a nice anchor point for us to come to 2, 3, 4 times a month together. And I guess the other thing I try to do more so these days, I think in the earlier part, well, actually not just the earlier part, but up until a few years ago, I travelled a lot for work. I was living in Sydney with the family, but working in New York and London. So I was commuting, 25, 26 weeks a year. And before that, years of regional travel when I was running teams throughout Asia Pacific, and probably lost a lot of the, important stuff with the elder kids by doing that, and, missed more birthdays than I care to remember, more, kind of school things and what have you. And these days I try to do, travel a bit now, not tons, but I try to do day trips. So I'd rather get up early, get to the airport, get down to Melbourne, do what I've got to do. And unless I need to be there for a few days for work, which happens, more often than not, I'll choose to do a day trip. So I get home and I can see the kids before bed and what have you. So that's how I try it. There's a few things that we do just to try and get that balance, because, we do work a lot, especially, again, in a business like Tabcorp, where we're a 24/7 business. Our busiest day of the week is Saturday. So, most people, who work, Monday to Friday, 9 to 5, Saturday and Sunday is kind of their time. They don't do generally, hopefully not too much work on weekends, but Saturdays, more often than not, there's, something that, needs a little bit of attention. Sometimes it's just an email, sometimes it's this, sometimes it's that, sometimes it's hours and hours if it's the busy part of our year, like Spring Racing Carnival. So trying to find balance can be tricky, but I think, again, those rituals and, those habits are the things that I use.
That's a great point. So spin bike, family time.
Yeah.
Anything else that you've incorporated recently or had for years that you do to help you?
Little things, there's we sit down at the table every night for dinner. So we're not like a family that eats at the counter or, has, eats in front of the telly or anything. Literally every night we sit down, we have the whole "how was your day" kind of thing, and try not to touch my phone or look at messages and things like that and I'm pretty good at it. But I think that's another thing as well, is that just kind of that coming together, because my wife, she works as well. So, and, you know, she leads a large team overseas as well. So it's not uncommon for her, you know, both of us to potentially have calls at night and things like that. But we try and kind of lock in that dinner time where it's just us and the kids literally having conversations about our days, what's happening tomorrow. You know, a couple of nights ago, our daughter was talking about going to school camp, which she's on now. She was just unbelievably excited about that. And I kind of think if we kind of didn't do that every night, I would potentially lose touch on what they're doing day to day. And I don't want to do that. I want to know what's happening day to day. And I want to help them if they need help. And that's our kind of landing place to have those conversations.
Yeah. And I guess, you know, like you mentioned before, you travel to New York and London, and I imagine health and family and things like that were put on the back burner.
Big time.
Great experience to travel, but there's always a cost to everything. But how was that? How was the obviously I'm from the UK originally, if you hadn't guessed. But how was working in London and working in New York versus Australia in terms of culture, the leadership sort of ethos and what you learned from that?
You know, there's a lot of similarities, right? But I think there's, you know, but I love the nuances of the differences. You know, like I think the you know the nuance. You know, being from the UK, right? You know, what do you do after work? You go and have a pint on the way home, right? Like that's like, I think that's probably less common here to do it sort of as regularly. But I always found that was a great way just to connect with, you know, kind of colleagues and things like that, and have the conversations that you may not necessarily have in the office, but, you know, kind of make those, you know, longer relationships, stronger relationships, you know, get to know the people a bit. I really enjoyed that kind of, you know, having a swift half on the way home. You know, that was good. I think the leadership style that I found in, you know, working in New York was, you know, I think the US is just such a large place, and, you know, the business landscape is just so much bigger than it is in Australia, that I think that, especially where I was working at News Corp, you know, the leadership team there had just unbelievable depth of experience, you know, international experience, you know, US experience and whatnot. And I was really lucky during my time there. The global CTO at the time, so I was working for News Corp Australia, and the global CTO kind of liked what we'd done here in Australia and sort of said, hey, do you want to come work for me? And, you know, take on a global role, and which was overwhelmingly, you know, kind of amazing that, you know, to get kind of tapped on the shoulder like that. And he was kind of, you know, in the latter part of his career at the time, and just, I don't know I think it was kind of right place at the right time, where I was, I suppose, old enough and I guess mature and aware enough to realize that this was a once in a lifetime awesome opportunity. And I learned so much from him. He, you know, and he was really gracious with his time. Like, obviously the global CTO of News Corporation is, you know, a crazy busy role, and, you know, he's doing early mornings, late nights, you know, busy during the day and whatnot. But he was just so generous with his time, and, you know, again, being an older gentleman, he just had just an unbelievable experience. And yeah, that was probably the person who I got the most lasting benefit from. You know, you take things from every leader you work with, sometimes negative things, to be honest. Like, you know, there's a bunch of things I go, hey, you know, that's a trait I don't want, you know, and that's an okay learning too. You know, it doesn't always have to be, you know, that's a trait I want. But, you know, working for Mark, yeah, it was just a really great opportunity. And, you know, if I could pick one thing that I really learned from him, it was probably empathy. You know, be less focused on what my motivations are in having a business dealing with someone, and really try to put myself in their shoes and understand what's their motivations, you know, what's driving their actions, what's driving their thought processes, what's keeping them up at night. You know, I want to, you know, get something from someone, or I want them to do something, but they might not want to do that because they've got 5 other priorities, daylight, and then my priority. So, you know, having empathy and understanding what is driving people, what motivates them. And then I think you can kind of adjust your approach to how you deal with them and how you communicate with them, and try and find, you know, a different approach or a different narrative that, you know, kind of meets them where they are. So that was probably, the biggest trait I took away from Mark, empathy.
Yeah, and with with that? So you've worked at some large companies. You're in Tabcorp now, Optus, News Corp. So you've got access there, or you were lucky enough to have access to a leader who could teach you a lot.
Yep.
When you were early on in your career, maybe when you were first starting out as I want to be a leader,
Yep.
you know, what was the light bulb moment where you wanted to start taking those leadership roles, and who did you learn from back then? I imagine there wasn't as many podcasts about 20 years ago.
No, there wasn't. It's I suppose I was lucky early in my career to, even though being quite junior in certain roles, to have access just by nature of the type of role I had or the systems that I was managing or what have you. There was 2 or 3 opportunities, earlier in my career where I had access to really senior people. Like, one of my first roles where I was like a IT support officer, what we would now call, EUC, end user computing, but, IT support officer, doing, the supporting like the regional general manager. So even though I was quite a junior guy working for, the support team leader, I was the regional general manager's guy. So I took care of his tech, and I had to, kind of make sure he was happy and what have you. And I just got a lot of exposure to him. And he was probably one of those ones where, there was probably 50 or 60% of, his leadership style that I was like, I'm not going to be that guy, quite, I suppose, forward and, kind of aggressive and what have you. But there were also certain things that were, that really kind of stuck with me as well, around, he was either really aggressive or really caring. And depending on, whether you're on his good side or his bad side. And I was lucky enough to get a lot of the caring piece, and he'd be interested in me, and he'd be interested in, how I was, what I was doing, what did you do on the weekend, how's the family, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that care bit is something that I've tried to maintain throughout my career as well. I think if you want to build, teams, and then you want to build good teams, great teams, and really high performing teams, like there's a lot of similarities, I guess, to family, like if you want to, especially if you want it to last. You can maybe build a great team because you hire amazing people who complement each other really well, and, each bring, kind of different strengths and what have you. So you can build it really, really well. But if you don't sustain it over time, it kind of, it doesn't last. And I found that, again, care is something that, I take an interest in my teams. So not just my, heads of and what have you, but like everyone in my team, you kind of come in and you take an interest. How are you today? Again, kind of pick up on, you can pick up on when people are a bit flat, and then, kind of walk over and have a chat with them. And, it takes just a few minutes. Everything okay? And I find that people respond really well to that. I think they appreciate, the effort of just asking, are you okay? And I think that's something that I like. It's something I really encourage my leadership team to do, is take an interest, understand what what's happening in your team's lives. Not prying and, kind of going, over the top, but just generally speaking, how are you going well? When things are going well, great. When things aren't, you can kind of pick up on it and then help. Yeah,
and you mentioned earlier about the time in London where, it was good to sort of have that little social after work at the pub, sort of have a chat and have an event and catch up with colleagues. I don't know if you've noticed this, but I feel like less people are drinking now, especially less younger people. Yeah. So there's obviously all other different ways. There's run clubs, so people are getting their social from other ways. But how do you incorporate that in a business? Because when I first started in recruitment, it was a heavy drinking culture. I don't know if that was the same in some of the industries you worked in.
Technology, 100%.
Yeah,
it used to be crazy.
Yeah. So how do you? Because we still need to scratch that social itch and
totally.
With colleagues. So how do you go about that now?
I think at Tab, I love what we do there. So we've got, kind of obviously our social clubs and things like that. We've recently just early this year moved into a lovely new office down at Darling Park, which has got like a huge amount of space and, kind of common areas, kitchens and things like that. And there's stuff on all the time. We have like, pizza every, kind of second or third Fridays, at about 4 or 5 o'clock. 50 pizzas get delivered, and the teams kind of all come together, and it's not just tech, like it's the whole company kind of come together in the common areas. We're having a table tennis tournament at the moment, which is awesome just to see during lunchtime people in there kind of practicing and what have you, and then you see them stick around after work and keep kind of going on with it. There's always, like today we're having a Harmony Day lunch where everyone's kind of bringing a dish from their kind of backgrounds and what have you. So, and I love being part of things like that. We celebrate Diwali, we celebrate kind of all different things, and it just brings people together for the sake of bringing people together. But you got to make the effort too. Like, it's easy enough to sit at your desk and not be part of it, or you can go in there and grab a slice of pizza or pick up the table tennis bat and what have you, and have a chat with people. Like when I find, when we're having these kind of big, get-togethers, which is pretty frequent, like we have things, like every couple of weeks, and then you kind of walk around and you see, there's pockets of people who aren't joining in and kind of going over and encouraging them. Come on, like unless it's something, unbelievably urgent, but it's for 4 o'clock on a Friday afternoon. Is it really going to be unbelievably urgent? Maybe not. And they're kind of encouraging them to kind of come in and just make the effort to, to get to know people better.
With table tennis, it's normally the standard gets pretty high, gets pretty competitive.
And I'm very, very bad at it.
Oh, really?
It's shocking. It was funny. I joked with T, the lady who's running it, and I'm like, if only there was a prize for last. And she said, actually, there is. So you've got no excuse. You've got to participate. But I hear our Melbourne team are having a Mario Kart challenge at the moment. So we need to do that in Sydney, and I'll get my groove on then. We have my son, my youngest son, and my youngest daughter and I, we have what we call the McKenzie Championship, at least, once or twice a week, where it's kind of first to get 4 wins, and we kind of rotate between us, and then whoever wins is the McKenzie champion. So, I reckon I might be able to hold my own with the Mario Kart challenge.
So you're feeling quietly confident with that one?
Maybe. Like my 7-year-old is uncannily good at it, and like I have to get him on a bad day if I'm going to be the McKenzie champion of the week.
With the experience that you've had in the last 20 years, there must be like 1 or 2 things that stand out where you either made big mistakes and learned from them, or you just had big learnings in general. Is there anything you can think of?
I think mistakes I've made. We all make mistakes. I make every day, inevitably. Like bigger things that have gone wrong, I guess, a few years ago, probably, I don't know, a bit over 10, 12 years ago now, we were running a technology transformation, really kind of, getting rid of some like literally 30, 40-year-old tech, putting in new tech, putting in back, like this is how old it was, putting in mobility solutions for the workforce and what have you. And, it was a tough gig. It was, literally working super old tech, trying to not just drag the technology into the future, but also, bring the company along with it as well. Like the workforce, we're working on pen and paper in a lot of areas, and we're kind of asking them to come on to using systems and whatnot. And then the folks who were using systems had been using the same ones for 20, 30 years and were very, very comfortable with them. So like that, there was a lot of, I suppose, change management that went into it. And it was hard, but we kind of did it and we got there and what have you. And about, I don't know, 6 months after we kind of got it done, and you kind of only feel like you're just coming up for air. One of the systems that we chose was being sunsetted. And it was just like, we've just spent millions of dollars rolling out this whole program. Like this system wasn't, the only thing we did, but it was a pretty important part. And the vendor was just like, yeah, we're not doing this anymore, we're out. Which that was tough. It was really tough. It was, having to explain to the CEO, having to explain to the board in London, how could we possibly have spent all of this money and all this efforts and what have you, and led the team through this huge organisational and technology change, only to then have to do another decent sized piece of it again within a year. So that was tough, and I felt a lot of it. So I was in charge of the tech piece, and like I took it pretty hard actually. Like it was like, what could I have done differently? Did I just make a bad decision? why didn't I research this more? How could I not have known that this was going to happen? And you kind of second guess yourself for a while. And thankfully, like the board and the CEO were both understanding of the situation. Like, obviously no one wanted that to happen. Could we have foreseen it? I don't know. I still sometimes think about it, if I'm honest. But yeah, that was tough. But I guess I got encouragement from my peers as, to, hey, it is what it is kind of thing. Now we just need to get on, and this bit needs to come out, and we need to find another bit and put it in, and we did. And I think that taught me a lot about resilience as well, because bad things are going to happen. Mistakes are going to be made. It's not out of malice. It's not out of, everyone makes bad decisions, everyone does make bad decisions, but also sometimes bad things just happen. So learning from that, getting up, dusting yourself off, I think is really important. And now when I make mistakes, you sometimes take it to heart for sure, but I think having that, what at the time was a brutal experience, and having to, either build that level of resilience or not, was, I suppose, a choice. And I decided to, work on it and, build that level of resilience. And I find now that if something goes wrong, okay, I accept it. What's next? How do we move forward now? And I think that I'm less, there's a lot less downtime when bad things happen now. It's more a case of acceptance, acknowledgement, and then get on with it.
Yeah. I feel like the speed into which you can bounce back when something goes wrong is really what separates the people that we, sort of look up to as mega successful, to where we are. So that resilience and that ability to bounce back quickly. And
I think like anything else, it's a muscle, right? You've got to build it. Like you don't, I definitely didn't instinctively have it. Like it wasn't an embedded trait within me. But again, you build it, you work it. I think the key is making sure that you acknowledge when bad things happen as well. I think the whole water off a duck's back thing is probably not good either, because I think that's probably a false resilience. I think acknowledging that didn't work, what could I have done differently, what could I have done better, and then get on with the next thing. But I think that acknowledgement, that's how I build the muscle.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think it is something that can be built and strengthened. I do also think there's a lot of value in the people around you that help with the resilience. Absolutely.
I think, I'm a big believer of you win as a team, you fail as a team, and you get back on the horse together as a team. Absolutely. You lean on your peers, you lean on your colleagues, you lean on, the people who work for me. 100%. Oh God, I don't know where I'd be without my wife. She's a huge rock of strength for me. And I think that the ability to do that without fear of people thinking poorly of you or or being embarrassed and what have you. I think that probably, for me, it's probably come more with maturity than anything else. I think earlier on, I was much more insular. Like I would have a problem and it would be my problem, and I'd sit with it and I'd stew on it and what have you. Whereas now, as someone said to me the other day, are you looking for a sword to fall on? If there's a problem, it is what it is, you know what I mean? I'll lean on my team and they lean on me as well, I've got between Australia and India over 400 people working for me, we have to be a team and we have to support each other and be there for each other. But acknowledging it and then asking for help is always a good start.
Has there ever been a time where you and the team have really surprised yourself? So there's been a massive challenge, you thought that there's, the chances of hitting this target are very slim now, we possibly can't do it, and then you've surprised yourself and overcome that? Yeah,
for sure. Yeah, it's there's been lots of little times like that. I think the little times like that happen quite a bit, and it's important to recognise when that happens, and then kind of make sure that the team recognise it as well, so as that they don't accidentally just keep on driving by and not realising that something cool just happened. So I think it happens a lot in little pieces, but it's happened in big pieces as well. I think back to kind of my time at News Corp Australia, And that was a great place to work. It was fun. It was busy, and it was technically challenging and what have you. But we built a really, really great team there, and it was a lot of people who were on the bus. Like they knew that we were doing stuff that was hard. They knew that we were doing stuff that in some instances hadn't been done before, which I think got everyone's kind of creative juices going and what have you. And we managed to kind of build out a data product there and create a P&L, like a positive P&L. Like technology in the vast majority of organizations is a cost center, whereas we were actually contributing back, and it was a really big success, so much so that it was adopted in the UK and the US and what have you, what we'd done in Australia. And again, compared to the size and scale of the US or even the UK, Australia is kind of typically seen as kind of quite small and maybe not necessarily always a leader, but we really led with that. And that was so much, I suppose, excitement, and so much, it was great to get that recognition that what we had done here could be, had to be adapted and what have you for, the various markets in other geographies. But, it was our thing that, worked, and it worked well, and all the benefits turned up, and we could take it overseas. That was awesome.
Yeah, that's huge. So you're leading around about 400 people now.
Yeah.
Anyone who's at the start of their leadership journey, just starting off, maybe they've got a handful of people in the team, they're going to be looking at that. I'm looking at that and going, that's a huge number. Yeah. Like, how do you do that? How do you balance everything, as we talked about before? Yeah. What changes from leading a small team, say, just starting out five people, versus the team you've got now?
There's a lot of commonality, actually, between the two. But I guess the biggest thing for me is how to sustainably scale it. And I think that means building a great leadership team around me, who have got a great leadership team around them, so as that all the things that I've spoken about around kind of care, around kind of communication, and making sure people are clear on things, that should be pervasive throughout the structure. So I think building a team of great leaders and then leading those leaders well and helping them be the best leaders they can be, so as that their teams get the benefit of it, I think is key. Communication is probably, if I think of the two things that I think my leadership style is built around, is clarity and communications. Mm-hmm. I think it's always really important when you have a strategy, when you have like a vision, a plan, an architecture, what have you, that people understand it, and they understand why we're doing it, and they understand what we're seeking to achieve from it, right? So every tech strategy that I've put in place or been part of putting in place, has to map back to the whole organizational strategy, right? So what is Tab trying to achieve? What is Optus trying to achieve? What is News Corp trying to achieve? And then the tech strategy is that underpins that, right? So it's not a different thing, it's an extension of that business strategy. And then taking that down into an actionable plan that people understand, but then communicating to them, here's how what you do every day is going to contribute to this part of the tech strategy, which then contributes to this part of the organizational strategy and the benefits, right? If you can see, I think that if you can see yourself in the strategy, if you can feel every day how what you're doing 7, 8, 9, 10 hours a day, how that's contributing to that, it's a bigger thing than just coming in and doing your job.
For sure.
So communication is that's the key. And again, but that still applies in a team of 4 or 5 as it does a team of 400. So, I try to, we have town halls, we have, every 2-3 weeks, we have what I call an open mic session, where on a Friday afternoon, we'll just have, it's a placeholder in all of my team's diary. If you're free, turn up. If you're not, that's okay. It's not a mandatory thing. People pop in, and it's just I'll go, hey, this is what's happened in the last couple of weeks. Maybe a few notable call outs going, great job, Amit and the team. You did a fantastic thing over here. Or, Jared and the team, you're killing it on the budget prep. Thanks very much. And then, okay, over to you guys. And ask me a question. My whole leadership team come, as long as, assuming they can, but my leadership team come, just ask this question. Nothing scripted, there's no packs, no nothing. And and we just sit there and chat. And I find that is a really great way to connect because, I've got my heads of there, I've got my senior managers there, I've got, support analysts there, database administrators there, and they can ask whatever they want, no rules. And I think keeping that kind of open communication is a really, really powerful way of people not, I suppose, getting anxious about not knowing things or having a question they may be afraid to ask, creating that sort of psychologically safe space for them to ask questions. And I actually end up enjoying it too because it's like Friday. It's usually the last thing on a Friday afternoon when we do it before you knock off, and we do a few questions and what have you. I give a bit of an update, and then inevitably we start talking about the footy on the weekend or the cricket coming up and what have you. Like it's really sporting culture at Tab, as you can imagine, and it's just a nice way to kind of end the week, but an important opportunity for the teams to ask whatever they want.
Yeah. What's the most outrageous question you've been asked?
Are the Tigers going to get the wooden spoon again? That was pretty disappointing because they did shortly thereafter. Outrageous questions. Sometimes, inevitably, sometimes you get, people being a bit, kind of provocative or controversial because, they're unhappy about something.
Yeah.
And that's okay.
I think that's the worry for some people to put an open forum out there. So you obviously, confident, back yourself and transparent to be able to do that.
Yeah, it is. And I think the important thing is, and I'll be the first to say this to the team at the time, especially if it's something that obviously they're quite either passionate about or potentially upset about or less upset but concerned about. And I don't have an answer right then and there because I may not, I always make a commitment to get back to you, worst case in the next day, So listen, I don't know. I'll get back to you, what have you, and then following through with that commitment is really important because otherwise it's just words. You've got to make sure you do that. But yeah, sometimes it does happen. You'll get you said this wasn't going to happen and this happened. We didn't think it was going to happen, or I hadn't planned for that to happen. 100%, I was wrong. Or actually, an opportunity came up that meant that it made sense to do this. We hadn't planned to do it, but then our information changed and it made sense to do it, so we did. So I think it's really important to acknowledge either when you've made a mistake or when you've decided to just change your mind. That's okay too. Changing your mind is not a bad thing. If you doggedly stick with a position, you're going to miss out on opportunities, right? So I think acknowledging that, being authentic, being honest, I'd never lie to the team. If there's something I can't talk about for various reasons, I say I can't talk about it. I acknowledge that it's a thing, but right now I can't. When I can, I will. So I think honesty, authenticity, I think these are important things.
Yeah, communication, as you mentioned, is key, right? It solves a lot of problems, saves a lot of headaches in most aspects of life.
It does. People don't like. I don't like. I don't think it's like decisions being made in back rooms in isolation of everyone else. I think the best decisions are made when you've got all of the relevant information available to you. And that includes engaging people who are going to be, affected or impacted by changes as well. How does this sound to you? What are your thoughts? How do you think we should approach this? I think you get the data points, from as many relevant, diverse, points of view as possible, and then you make a decision and you communicate it.
What was the toughest time of your career, do you think?
It depends on what tough means, I guess. Times when things were going badly, or sometimes things can be going really, really well, but it's still tough. I think when I joined Tab, like I said, back in 2022, we had a huge change agenda, a huge transformation agenda ahead of us. We'd gone from being one really big business to the demerger and then two big businesses. It was a really big work plan ahead of us, and I'm pretty sure all but one of the technology leadership team that came in at that time was new. So we were kind of coming in, trying to understand the ecosystem, trying to understand, we were still technically separating the two businesses for a long time to come, which is really, really challenging as well, to be trying to build and transform and grow while in parallel doing a major that was like the first kind of year and a half was probably like, it was tough, but it wasn't bad. It was probably some of the most fulfilling work I've ever done, because when you're, got that growth agenda and when you're pushing it, you see things turn up all the time. Not necessarily always big things, but you see a bit of benefit turn up quite regularly. So that was really fulfilling, but it was hard because, we were dealing with a lot of legacy technology. We were dealing with, again, trying to, even just, it might sound trivial, but just trying to schedule things so as that you could, put in something into production that's part of your growth and your transformation, but there being contention with the separation activities still happening between lotteries and Tab, right? So it was tough by way of just, it was all consuming. There was, just a lot going on all the time. But we have a great team and, great leadership, and we were all, connected, and so it was hugely fulfilling, but tough and exhausting.
Yeah, I bet. Sounds exhausting.
Yeah.
It's been talked about a lot since COVID, since 2020, but what's your ethos on the remote working, hybrid, in office? There's a lot of movement again. There's a bit of a shift of people going back in, and It's just this constant seesaw. So what are your thoughts? Yeah,
so like at Tab, so at Tab, our company, we were one of the first to say we're full-time back in the office. Like kind of late-ish last year, I think in the kind of last quarter of last year. Listen, I love the face-to-face interactions in the office. I really do. You know what I mean? Like, why would I go to Melbourne if it could all be done to the same level and the same, quality and the same completeness on a Teams call or a Zoom call? You know what I mean? Like, I go down there because I can do it better. I can have a better connection. I can get more out of it. Hopefully the people I'm, kind of working with get more out of it. So I love it. And again, having been in IT forever, we love a whiteboard, right? So, kind of getting a group of engineers or, a group of architects in there and going, cool, we're going to solve this problem, closing the door, grabbing the blue and the red whiteboard markers and getting into it. So many of the big challenges that I've encountered over the years have been either solved or, significantly progressed by doing that, getting in, whiteboarding, talking it through and what have you. So personally, I find huge value in being together and I enjoy it. In saying that, I think that there's inevitably benefit in working from home as well. You know what I mean? Like there are certain tasks that, you can do autonomously, there's certain things that it makes more sense, if you're going to be sitting in a room by yourself in the office all day long versus that. So I get it, I think, so in an ideal world for me, it'd probably be a hybrid arrangement of, maybe like even before we had the 5 days a week back in the office, I was doing probably 4 days in the office and 1 day at home. That worked for me, and I kind of scheduled my week so as that the things I was doing on my day at home were those kind of autonomous things. So I didn't necessarily sit there on Teams all day long, like a few meetings here and there, but it was like, I need to read this, I need to review this, I need to do this. And I'd kind of try and structure my week that way. And that kind of worked for me. But yeah, it's, like I'm very much against like full-time work from home. I think that it's, that connection that you get to your colleagues and, the relationships you can build and things like that. I just don't think that it works when you're 100% at home.
No, I agree. I think hybrid is definitely the best of both. And a great point, if you're going to be at home, like focus on deep work, the parts where you're not going to get distracted, you can fully engage, because when you're in the office you do get those interactions and they're valuable, but sometimes it's like
it is. And I think maybe that's actually been one of the I'm not going to say failings, but maybe one of the things that was never fully optimized with working, because I think eventually working from home will peter away. I don't think it's necessarily going to happen next week, next year even, but I think like we didn't do it for a long time, right? We've only done it for,
I think governments are sort of quietly subsidising businesses as well to come back, because absolutely. The CBDs, they need to. It's the economy, right?
It's important, right? It really is. Like you think, like when the building that we're in now in Sussex Street, I was in the same building back in 2005 14, 15, when I was working at Salesforce, before they moved to Circular Quay. And downstairs in that building, it's a beautiful building, there's a food court, just a small food court, but it used to be great. There was like maybe 5 or 6 different places where you could get, a variety of different foods. So like, if you needed just to quickly pop down and grab something, because you've got another meeting or something, it was really, you had a bit of variety, which was nice. There's one shop in there open now, like one out of there was 5 or 6 there before, and now there's one. And it's like, working from home is killing the CBD. You're right. It's not good.
Yeah, no, it's sad times. What advice would you give to someone who was just starting out in their career and wants to move into leadership?
My advice would be, make sure it's what you want to do. Like, I mean that very genuinely. I think for a long time, it's getting a lot better, but especially in technology, for a long time, it was your path to earning more money was to become a leader. Whereas I think over the last sort of, probably not that long, only like maybe the last 5 or 6 years really, you've started to see a lot more individual contributor senior roles, you know what I mean? Like these, we call them like chief engineers now, or distinguished engineers, or chief architects and things, who aren't necessarily people leaders, but thought leaders and technologist leaders and things like that. Because for a long time, you've probably heard the saying, the great way to kill a good technologist is to make him a manager. But people have families, people have, want to earn more money and what have you. But so that was it, right? You'd go from being an engineer or an architect or something into a manager, and whilst that not really being your passion and not really being what you wanted to do, but that was your vehicle to earn more money. Again, we're getting better at that. So back to your question, I would say make sure like, what are your motivations for doing it? Why do you want to be a leader? Is it something you have a passion for? Is it something you even think you might have a passion for, that you want to kind of test and figure that out? I would always say never do it for the money, because there are other ways to earn money without necessarily going into being a manager or a leader. So if you do want to do it, if you do have that passion and you want to have it and what have you, I would say, my approach was, and it wasn't deliberate, but was learn from everyone. Every person who you work for, every person, and not just your manager, but, other leaders throughout the organisation, what have you. Be observant, be curious, ask questions, how do you approach this? I think more often than not, a good leader and pretty much always a great leader, when asked a question about leadership or asked for some advice and some guidance, will give it. I think that's, so be curious, ask the questions and what have you. As you do become, I suppose, a leader of teams and maybe a leader of many teams, stay true to what matters to you. Always remember why you got into it. I got into it, really I wanted to make people's lives better, and I wanted to, them to enjoy work, be engaged in work, and therefore do good things, and I've always sort of stuck to that. It's, again, give that clarity, give that communication, show care. Good things turn up. You've got engaged teams who want to be there, who do better work, which is good for the business, which is good for the customers. Like, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy of goodness, right? But yeah, they're the things that I remember is advisors, figure out why you want to do it. And if you're going to do it, figure out what kind of leader you want to be. Stick to that, evolve it over time, but stick to it, stay true to it. Don't I've seen good leaders turn into bad leaders as well. That happens. It, more often than not because of things like money, to be honest. So, but if you stay true to who you are and what you want to achieve, I think it's the best thing in the world. I love it. I absolutely love it. It's even like people sometimes say to me, "You've worked in so many different industries. How is excuse me, like how does it transcend? How do you this and that?" And well, kind of industries and technologies you can learn. I think especially you look at technologies, a great technologist can learn different things. You can go from, knowing Java to knowing Spark, you can this, that, you've got to have an interest in it, but you can learn it. And I think similarly with leadership is you can learn your industry, but you can't learn why you want to be a leader. That's in you, so stay true to your principles, evolve them, and I think it works out. Yeah.
It reminds me of a company I worked at. I wasn't really thinking about leadership at all. I think like a lot of people, I thought, one day, I'll get there one day. And, that's feels like the natural progression. And then my managing director at the time took me for lunch, went, had a wine, had a beer, had a nice lunch. And he sort of said, we want to move you into leadership. We want to encourage you on that path. And that was how the journey began. So it was sort of external from the manager. And I'd think back to it, and I think a lot of companies go down that route. Maybe they do see potential, but also they go down that route because they want to keep people at the company who are individually contributing well, and they know they want them at the company. So I don't know, what are your thoughts on that?
Listen, I think sometimes people may not have necessarily asked themselves the question as well. So you could be a seasoned individual contributor doing a great job and what have you, but maybe the opportunity had never presented itself, or it's not something you'd ever sort of seriously considered. But like I've had team members, architects, in particular over time, where like I see something in them. I see the way, people gravitate towards them, people, kind of seek out their advice, seek out their guidance, and then you sort of see how they respond to that. And sometimes you go like, God, if you could do that on scale, you would be a fantastic leader. And it's probably 2 or 3 that I've seen that in over time, and then, similarly kind of said to them, hey, have you thought about actually leading this team? And then over time, they're building up into quite senior roles. And 2 or 3 of them have gone, okay, let's give it a go. Like, none of them were absolutely, I want to do that, because that wasn't really what they were thinking about. But that little kind of poke of seeding that thought into their minds, kind of it grew, and some of them are very senior people now. But I've also had a couple say, it's not my bag. You know what I mean? Like but that didn't change who they were with regards to still being, having that gravitas and people seeking them out and seeking out their advice and what have you. That's still who they are, and that's still what they do, and they're very, very happy with it, and they're good at it. But they didn't want to, that's their level of leadership. They didn't want to, I suppose, they didn't want to have the accountability for broader people leadership and things like that, which is fine, But I think I think a good leader seeks out other good leaders and, maybe identifies talent.
Yeah, and you've got to respect the people who go, no, it's not for me, and
totally,
carry on.
Absolutely, and it's funny. I remember one of the guys. He's a really great guy, and I said to him, have you thought about this, man? You are leading. You're leading right now. Like, I know you don't necessarily say, but you are.
We're not paying you for it yet, but
this is your leadership. It's here, and I think that it could scale and what have you. But he was like, I don't want to get off the tools though. He was just is one of the most inquisitive architects I've ever met in my life. You know what I mean? Like, he's constantly self-learning and things like that. Like, he's just like, and he's brilliant at it. And he's just like, no, this is my passion. He said, if other people get stuff from me, I said, I'm more than happy to share and what have you. And but yeah, he wanted to stay on the tools, and that's totally good too, because in his case, maybe the way to ruin a great engineer is to make him a manager. You know what I mean?
Yeah, 100%. What are the big challenges you see going forward in the future, leadership in tech? I
think the next couple, 3 years is going to be a big change. Like, it's like the disruption's already started with generative AI. You know what I mean? And I say disruption not in a negative way at all, but a disruption to the status quo. I think more automation, it's going to keep getting, there's going to be more of it, and it's going to get better. So, we're at that kind of earlier point at the moment where, code generation and, kind of test automation and things like that, leveraging generative AI is, people are still, I think, a bit skeptical. We're trialing some stuff now, which I love, but it's kind of early days, but it's at the beginning of that hype cycle, right? Like, it's got a long way to go before it sort of hits the top. So I think there's going to be a continued disruption in the types of roles within technology, what existing roles do every day and how much they do. Like, if you're an engineer that a co-pilot, in a couple of years' time or a year's time or whenever, if you're an engineer and, a co-pilot can do 80% of what you used to do all day long, what's your role look like now? What are you going to do? How are you going to continue to contribute and add value? So I think we're going to see a change in roles and role types as part of that, as part of this disruption. So I think the challenge of leadership is how do we manage that process well and bring people along the journey and figure out what their new paths look like. What do the roles of the future look like? I think there's going to be a lot more focus on governance and a lot more focus on ethics and what have you with regards to Gen AI and how we employ it. So I think it's not going to be an easy couple, I'd say the next 2 to 5 years. I think it's not going to be easy as a technology leader, but I do think that it's a huge opportunity. So for those of us who accept that this is happening, because it is, and accept that we are at the start of the hype cycle and it's got a long way to go north, what are you going to do as a leader? What am I going to do as a leader in order to make sure that my teams are well equipped to be the people and and have the roles of the future? How are we going to, as a business, get the most value out of it? How are we going to monetize it? How are we going to bring it to our customers? Like there's a lot of unknowns at the moment, which I think, again, for me, that I see that as an opportunity, and I think that's pretty fun.
Yeah. From clients that I'm speaking with at the moment, it seems like they are, focusing heavily on data and things like that, but also building maybe leaner teams now and encouraging them to leverage AI. So are you seeing that in enterprise? Yeah,
definitely. It's like, I think that's where we're going. I think right now, like, we're still experimental with regards to co-pilots and things like that. Early experiments are good though, you know what I mean? Like it's really good. So I think we're going to start seeing leaner teams, or maybe more smaller teams. I think I see that as well too, right? I think we have the opportunity to kind of break open the technology ecosystem a bit and kind of democratize, the use of AI a bit more again. But that's where you got to think about ethics, governance, quality, things like that, right? So again, the role of leadership is changing as we look how we're going to get value from this.
That's a great point to finish on, Matt. Thanks a lot for coming on to the show. Really appreciate you spending the time to have a chat.
Not at all. Thank you very much, mate. I've really enjoyed it. Thank you.